Hi everyone, welcome back to the Growing Generations podcast. I'm Emmanuel Arce, well known to be the ultimate gardener. So in today's episode, we have a completely new gardener to interview and discuss about a new garden topic. So without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Amanda from the Ever Hopeful
Good
Gardener.
morning. Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. I know when I was creating the podcast list, like when I was having my roster, you definitely were on that list because I've been following you for some time and I love everything you do. So, jumping right into the interview part of things. So, what I was discussing with Gardner Scott the last episode was everybody has a unique first gardening experience. Like everybody who I interviewed gave me such a unique gardening experience. So, what would have to be your very first gardening
I have
experience?
to laugh because I can't remember my first gardening experience. I mean, I know there obviously was one, but what sticks in my head is just this general sense of being included in the gardening and in the yard with my parents growing up. And that, you know, that influenced me to then involve my children. And I think one of the best things people can do is involve their kids in the garden because even if they don't have that specific memory, they have this just general sense of like what an amazing experience that was. I mean, I'm pretty sure there aren't a lot of like fights or arguing in the garden. It's just always a good experience for kids to be out there with their parents and their siblings and just getting their hands in nature and being grounded. And obviously, when I was growing up, there weren't the technology that didn't exist back then that there is today. But getting those kids to disconnect and then put their hands in the dirt and just learn all about that, like, I think that is so amazing. And I hope lots of people include their children when they're gardening, even though it can be excruciatingly frustrating.
Agree, definitely. When I started gardening, I started when I was young. My dad actually introduced me into gardening in a young age. And definitely what I tell people is try to involve like your kids to get into gardening because gardening was one of those hobbies that was like pushed to the side and it wasn't really something a lot of kids were into nowadays since technology is a thing. And so I was like, gardening is so fun to do, so that's why I was like, try to involve the kids to do it. Try to some fun varieties that are able to grow like super quickly, that they'll be able to harvest it. Like at my old job, my boss used to incorporate her kids in absolutely everything, and those kids were excited to go outside. So it was definitely like pleasing to see like younger kids getting into gardening. So definitely, like I've noticed from the people I interviewed that their very first gardening experience started at a young age. Like their very first like interaction with plants and stuff like that, it was at a young age introduced by a family member. So that is another great
Yeah, and
story.
I have to say,
So
my kids are teenagers now, so they're not super interested in the garden. However, as much as I don't really love TikTok, it has influenced my 14-year-old daughter to be into houseplants. So she and I have been able to bond over houseplants because I think there's a lot of fun TikTok accounts with houseplants these days. And then I try and get my 11-year-old son interested in plants by telling him that, NASA has snake plants in space because they give off so much oxygen. Would you like one in your room? And he's like, okay.
that's so cute. And so, something I always say to gardeners out there is that inspiration is one of those key things you find in the garden industry because a lot of gardeners tend to get inspired by other gardeners or they get inspired by a landscape design they see locally or they get inspired by something. And so, who or what inspired you to get into
Well,
gardening?
obviously, my parents played a role in introducing it to me at a young age. But I think what really got me inspired to garden was when we owned our first home, and the people before us had not really landscaped much, and the yard just looked boring. And I wanted to make a beautiful space. And gardening is all about creating this gorgeous space of like peace and enjoyment for yourself. And I wanted that for my home, which is where we spent the majority of our time. So I wanted to get into gardening to create a beautiful space, but also I was just intrigued by the idea of growing my own food. And I definitely was not good at it when I started. But the idea of being able to grow my own food, I just thought was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. When I started back here, the backyard was just grass because my dad is those types of dads who does not like to give up his grass. Like, I couldn't convince him. If not, I told my mom, I'm like, Ma, I'm running out of space. Like, I need more space to grow projects or do stuff. And she was like, I'll talk to your dad. And then, like, we slowly by slowly, like, moved out. And so now I took over the entire backyard of the house. And he's okay with it because originally I started off as an
Mm-hmm.
ornamental gardener, as you can see. I started off as an ornamental gardener. Like, I used to grow roses, zinnias, everything in that area. But slowly by slowly, my mom was like, if an apocalypse or something happens, I won't be able to go outside and bite a branch of flowers. And then she was like, I need you to grow vegetables, because that's one of the main reasons why I talked to your dad. And so that's when I was like, let me just look at some YouTube videos and get inspired. And that's when I just full blown like started growing food, because it's super like mesmerizing to see how a small little plant develops to a mature plant that you harvest. It's just so mesmerizing and fascinating to me, and it's just really really fun to
I also
harvest things.
think
So
with gardening, there's
definitely,
always something to learn. So if you're the type of person that
yes.
loves learning new things, you just never get bored. It's like the hobby that just keeps going and keeps going because there are so many weird things you can grow and try or experiments you can do. So I think people who are very curious by nature are gravitated to gardening.
Agree, definitely. Because in the garden industry, like if someone tells you my garden is complete and done, it's
who,
not, because it's never ever
who
complete
has
or
ever
done.
said that?
Because no, like I've actually experienced like somebody who I was just like chatting with it, and like they sent me a message through my inbox, and they're like, "Yeah, my garden is complete and done. Like there's nothing else to do with it." And I was just like,
Okay.
are you sure what you are talking about? I'm like, cause do you know that if you're growing annuals or if you're doing something, they'll die, right? Like, there's some things that like there's called pesticide or pests and diseases that roam around. Yeah, your garden's not complete. Like my garden has evolved so many times throughout last year, like I couldn't even keep count. So definitely, I say like a garden is like everlasting. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't
I agree
finish.
completely.
So a lot of people have many many things that they love about gardening, whether it be growing their own food or getting their little fresh bouquet out the garden, or whether it be anything. What would have to be your favorite thing about gardening?
Oh, my favorite thing about gardening is trying the new things. So this year I'm going to grow a lot of things I've never grown before. A couple that I'm super interested in are the toothache plant, which apparently makes your mouth numb if you chew on it. I'm really excited to give some to my children and my husband and not tell them. And I'm also going to grow garbanzo beans for the first time. And I just went to the grocery store and bought a bag of dried garbanzo beans and I planted them and they grew. So we'll see what happens with that. But the not knowing and the trying something new, like that is what I love most about gardening.
So definitely you're that type of gardener who likes to experiment and try new things. That's definitely what I realized. Because for me, I love trying new varieties to see what I could grow in South Florida, because we're stuck to the regular tomatoes, lettuces, and those boring basic things. And especially with like Baker Creek, who come out with like these fun varieties, I'm like, let me see if they grow in my garden. But I usually don't dedicate a huge area to it if it like fails per se. So I usually grow the heavy hitters and stuff like that, but I definitely like to try out new things, because then I'll be able to know, okay, I'm able to grow this. Or like you said, everything's like a learning experience, that if it doesn't work or if you did something wrong, you'll learn from it and you'll improve the next following up growing
Nothing,
season. So definitely try yeah, new
nothing
things.
motivates me more than someone telling me I can't do something or I shouldn't do something because I'm like, well, why? Let's try it. Let's see what happens. So experimenting is definitely my favorite thing to do in the garden because I've learned that a lot of things that people have said won't work, I've gotten them to work because everybody's garden is so different. Like I just don't think people should listen to everybody else and they should just do whatever they want.
Agreed, definitely. So, as a gardener, and you as a gardener as well, we've grown so many things in our gardens year after year, trial and error, as well as trying new things. And so, out of the entire list of plants you've grown, what would have to be your favorite
All
plant to
right.
grow?
It definitely changes over the years. Right now, my favorite plant to grow is any type of milkweed because I'm very involved with trying to help the monarch population repopulate, and milkweed is the only plant that the caterpillars will eat. So it's the only plant that the butterflies will lay their eggs on. So there's nothing cooler than seeing a monarch butterfly lay eggs on your milkweed and then seeing the caterpillars get bigger and those turning into monarch butterflies. I just think it's very inspiring, and I know that I'm doing something that's helpful for the nature. So right now, milkweed is my favorite. What about you?
For me, I always say usually it has to be cabbage because what I've realized here in South Florida is that my brassicas never get touched by
What?
anything. And I always hear that other gardeners like are like completely like shocked because they're like, there's the cabbage moth, there's aphids, there's this, there's that, and I'm like, I know they exist here in South Florida, but the cabbage moth, I've never seen it before in my garden. But when it comes to my cabbages and my brassicas in general, I never experience anything with them. Like they're always
Oh my
clean.
God.
Like even if I grow them in
Okay, hold
mats,
on.
like I've never treated them before. Like I harvested over 20 heads of cabbage this growing year, and none of them got touched by aphids, by Wi-Fi or anything. Like I just planted them and they just did phenomenal. So like I
I'm
always say
also
cabbage.
intrigued though with your growing climate, like your weather, that you're able to do something that typically wants to be cold. Like I have a hard time doing cabbage here in North Carolina because it just gets too hot.
Yeah, for here, I don't really know. Like when it comes to like our
Hmm.
winter temps, they consider it to be like spring temperatures because we get down to like the 50s and 60s, and we just like stay constantly in those temperatures for like a long period of time. So that kind of gives us like an open window to like grow these types of things because we'll never go above 70s or 80s. Only this week, because like we're entering spring, we jolted up to the 90s, but we dropped back down again to the 50s. So like it's definitely like a constant like 50s or 60s, which is temperatures I tend to see that my cabbages tend to love. So yeah, it's working in South Florida can be a little bit stressful because of the temperatures that I have
I
to work
bet.
with. So on the opposite spectrum of things, what would have to be your least favorite plant to
This
grow?
never changes. And it's in the brassica family, and it's Brussels sprouts because I have never been able to successfully grow them. I tried for 7 or 8 years and finally was like, what am I doing? I'm
Lord.
wasting all this space. I'm eating the leaves, but like that's not why I'm growing it. I want Brussels. So I've given up on Brussels sprouts for the time being, and they are my plant nemesis.
Oh Lord, I've definitely because I know um some other gardeners directed like Brooke from the Vintage Gardener, which was someone we interviewed the first episode. She was like, "Yeah, I don't like super tunias because they don't grow well here," and like it's totally depending on where
Mm.
you live, as well as depends on the gardener. I feel like because this is my first year growing Brussels sprouts, so now you like put like a huge warning sign for me because like this is my first year growing them. Although they're like developing the Brussels sprouts, what did you experience with them? Like, would they not develop
Um,
it, or did they not
Yeah,
develop
like I
properly?
basically grew micro Brussels sprouts. They were the smallest things you've ever seen, and then it got hot, and then they bolted. I mean, it's like I just could never get them to develop, no matter when I started them, like in August to go all winter. I know people near me are able to grow them, so it's not the climate or the weather; it's just me.
No, um, for me, like I'm hoping that my Brussels sprouts do well this time because I know my mom wanted some. But like we're jolting, like starting to like slowly creep up to the higher temperature, so like I'm afraid of anything bolting. But at the same time, I've always wanted to save some
Mhm.
seeds, so I guess I don't know. But this is definitely my first time. They're developing, but they're not like to the harvestable size yet. So definitely I have to wait on that. They're growing in a Smart Pods junior raised
Hmm.
bed currently, so we'll see how that ends
Well,
up
at least you
going.
can still eat the leaves like you would eat like kale. Um, and I want to know what your least favorite thing to grow is.
Ooh, my least favorite thing, what to grow? So, like for me, I can literally plant something and it will grow decently
Hmm.
for me. But for me, I probably have to say like beetroot because for me, I always never have success growing beetroot whatsoever. I like plant it, it grows like the leaves and everything, but I never get that sizable
Hmm.
root. I don't know if it's me or if it's the soil or something, but I never have success growing beets. So it's like definitely towards that spectrum where it's possible if I like change certain things, but it's definitely like in the list of being one of my least favorite plants to grow. Like you'll barely see me growing them. So, like I say, after the pandemic, we welcomed a whole bunch of gardeners into the garden industry, which means we invited a whole bunch of creative gardeners and a whole bunch of ideas surfaced the roof as well. So, out of all the gardening techniques that are out there in the garden industry, what would have to be your favorite gardening technique to do in the garden?
It would absolutely be regenerative gardening. The last year and a half has had me obsessed with the idea of working with nature instead of trying to control it, and also building soil health and learning like what exactly is going on in the soil. Like it's only the last 40 years that scientists have really figured out like what is the purpose behind these organisms, what is the purpose behind this, and it's fascinating. So if you like that type of thing at all, there's lots of books to read and there's lots of podcasts where people interview scientists that talk about it. And so I have done a deep dive into reading and watching and listening to everything I can about how to like build your soil health, and compost plays a huge role in that, which is another reason why I'm obsessed with my compost. So I would say regenerative gardening, and for me that looks like literally spraying nothing in my garden except maybe like a compost or worm tea. I don't use any pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, not even if they're organic. I use nothing. And I'm just trying to work with the soil to make healthy plants that are less attractive to pests because they have higher sugar content and pests can't really digest the sugar very well. It's just I love the idea of working with nature because think about it, like the world, the earth was able to grow plants and do really well before humans came along and decided we know best. I'm going to force feed you nitrogen. I'm going to force feed you phosphorus that you can't absorb. Like we want to meddle too much. So I like the idea of kind of letting go and working with nature, and it also has made my gardening experience better. Like I'm less stressed out of like, oh God, there's a pest on my whatever. Let me look up, let me Google what I should spray on it and run to Home Depot and buy that spray. Like there's just none of that anymore. It's like, oh well, it's very freeing.
That's a great gardening technique. And definitely, I've heard some gardeners be like, yeah, I'd never use pesticides or herbicides or anything. I just kind of let the garden be. Because definitely, when pest or diseases, something I realize is we kind of made it like a big deal. Because although there is organic solutions to fix it. Like you can have host plants, which are like plants you don't really care about and that attract the pests and diseases, and you can keep those away from what you want to eat instead of spraying anything in the garden. So definitely working with nature and allowing the plants to do their thing without like
Mm-hmm.
messing with them is definitely a great like mindset and gardening technique because like what you said, it's more stressful free because you don't have to stay on top of like, oh my god, this has aphids. I have to go spray. I have to do something to go ahead and get rid of them. If not, kind of just like let it be because they all tend like nature tends to just like figure it out on its
There's
own. And
two,
sometimes
there's like two things that about gardeners that I think really trip us up. The first is that most of us are impatient. Like we want it to be awesome, and we want it to be awesome right now. And so when aphids show up, we aren't patient enough to give it a minute and let the ladybugs find the aphids and take care of it for us. And then the second thing is, I think a lot of gardeners are a little bit caught up with the idea of perfection. Like they don't want bug chewed leaves, but that's nature. Like the leaves of your plants are going to have a couple holes in them. There's usually enough to share with nature, with the pests, that's not going to decimate an entire crop. And the problem is in our efforts to be perfect and impatient, we are spraying these quick fixes that don't end up being a fix because they just lead to another problem. It's like this roller coaster you can't get off of, or like merry-go-round you can't get off of I sprayed for this and it got rid of it, but it weakened the plant, which made it more attractive to another pest. So now I'm gonna spray again, and we just get in this just like, oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for? A merry-go-round, and we can't get off, and it's just take a deep breath and let it go.
Let it be. Definitely, I have to agree on that because when I started gardening, I was one of those impatient gardeners. And like right now, I am still a little bit impatient. But what I realized is gardening is supposed to be a more stressful free environment. And for us to just like stay on top of everything kind of makes it a bit stressful. So to like completely like avoid that, just kind of let it be. Like if the plant is not salvageable, then just toss it, and try again. That's why we say trial and error. That's why we say we learn from what we've done before and we try to improve it or fix it or try to figure out a solution towards it that can make a little bit more stressful free, since gardening is supposed to be a stressful
Yes,
free
and
environment.
also I think managing expectations is huge, especially for new gardeners. I think a lot of new gardeners come out and think they should have 100% success. And that's just a recipe for being super disappointed at the end of the season. And if
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
expectations are, you know what, I just hope that like half the things I try work, then you're probably going to be pleasantly surprised. So I always manage my expectations, and I realize, like, okay, you know what, this year I could have a terrible tomato crop, and that'll be super disappointing. But there's always next year. Like, you can just try growing it again.
Definitely. Something I tell beginner gardeners whenever they ask me for tips and advice, because they're always wanting to like jump into it and expect the best. What I say is, even if there's a gardener who studied
Mm-hmm.
years for this or who has years under their belt, they always tend to do a mistake or they don't have success with a certain plant because that's how gardening is. And always tell them that never feel disappointed if you didn't really like get to your expectations that year, but always do like databases on what you did, try to improve on what the mistakes you did or the plant selections you had, and try to improve and manage it for the next year, and you'll see that over the years you're going to improve and improve and improve to the point where you'll be able to reach what you expected. That's definitely something I like. When I started off, I was like, I want to have everything in the garden and make it look pretty. Well, didn't really work out. So you kind of have to work with the fact that there is going to be
Mm-hmm.
trial and error. So definitely have to work around it and be patient. That's something that is key. So moving more towards the media side of things, what would have to be your goal with the ever hopeful gardener?
My goal with this social media account is to spread the word and encourage people to compost. I'm very passionate about that. And that ties in also to the regenerative gardening and soil health. I'm actually taking a course through the Kiss the Ground network, that movie that came out on Netflix, that's so good, uh, where I'm learning how to better speak about soil health so that I can spread the word. That's a course that, like, I'm paying money to take just because I want to be able to speak intelligently about it. So my goal is to, like, one part educate, and then the second part encourage people to try regenerative gardening, to learn about soil health, and to try composting, because I firmly believe there's nothing better you can do for your garden than to make your own compost and add it to your garden.
Definitely have to agree on that because this one gardener told me before is she feels the best way gardening is to return to the soil what we receive. So like if there is like a tomato or something we get from the ground and there's scraps at the end, she feels that composting is the best way to do it because we're returning to the ground what we took. So she feels like we take something from the ground, we put
I
something back
love
into the
that.
ground
I love that.
without like using like pesticides or chemically produced fertilizers. She says, whatever I take from the garden, I always figure out a way how to put it back without buying fertilizers or anything. Because she said the best way to grow the best plants is to give the ground what it gave us. So I was like, let me quote you on that real quickly. Because that is if you think about it, that is the best way. Because what all the gardeners say is when growing your own food, composting and using organic materials is what works best for plants. And so when she said we give the ground what it gives us, definitely plays a part in like the success of growing your own food to the altitude a lot of us want to do it towards. So definitely have to agree
Yeah, I
with
love
that.
that. I love the way she put that. That's perfect.
Yeah, so where do you see yourself in the future? Because I see some gardeners say, "Oh, I want to build a nursery. I want to build a platform to educate people on YouTube or on Instagram." Where would have to be? Where do you see yourself in the future?
Okay, well, first of all, in the future, I see myself on a lot more land where I can like just ramp up
Agree.
everything and do everything on a bigger scale, mainly for my own personal enjoyment, but also to maybe be able to have people to that space to show them, like, okay, you want to learn how to compost? Come out to my land and we will compost together. I will teach you everything. You can do it hands on. That would be so cool. That is way far in the future. In the meantime, I see myself in the near future educating people about compost and helping them do it. And actually, I did give a presentation recently to my local Dahlia Society about 4 or 5 ways you can compost in your backyard. And I'm getting ready to give another one this Saturday to the library system. So that is like getting me really energized. And I'm getting ready to volunteer at a youth like um, garden camp also and talk to kids about gardening. So I feel like I see myself moving into like I don't want to say education because I don't necessarily know that I'm qualified to educate anyone, but just to inspire. That like I'm just a normal backyard gardener and here are the things I'm doing and let me show you how you could maybe do it also. So that's where I see myself going in the near future. More like in-person
That's
presentations.
amazing. That's amazing because to hear that you're gonna be like inspiring other people locally, that is amazing. I know when I was younger, we had gone to a garden community that was a bit farther away from us, and their garden looked really nice. And they're like a community garden that's built off a school, and so I was definitely inspired more towards there, and I was doing a little bit more research on my community, on my city, and everything. And I just realized that they have like a garden, a community garden, but that they're looking for a garden leader to like manage everything. So I'm like, should I? Should I not? So I still have to look a little bit more into that and discuss it with my parents because it's definitely a great opportunity. That's where I'm able to go ahead and express more inspiring towards local people as well as educate people as well because I feel that inspiring people is what allows gardening to be how it is because like I said in the beginning, inspiration always moves. So that's what always tends to help gardeners want to do more. So that's amazing what
Yes,
you
I
are
think,
doing, and I
people
applaud you
talk
for
about
that.
how gardeners are so generous, and I think it's because we all get so much joy from our garden, right? That we can't understand why other people are not gardening, and we just want to share with them, like, look how much fun you can have, like, look how much joy this could bring with you, like that we almost kind of like try and push it on people. And I did. It's like I think my greatest accomplishment to date, in terms of like what brings me joy, is that I got my across the street neighbor to start gardening, like on a raised bed on her deck, and I'm just like, yes, and she loves it.
Yeah.
She's hooked now. I mean, how can you not be?
That's amazing. Definitely. Like my neighbor, you see like this red fence that my neighbor right across it. Like I always go to her house. We always do gardening project because it's her and her sister, and they like fight because they're like, I love flowers and I need my roses and everything. But the other sister would be like, I need my food. Like the ground is made for food, not for flowers and for it to look pretty. So like I'm constantly there helping both people. Like after I record three people because I have like three recordings today. When I finish that, I have to go over there and help the neighbor do her gardening projects as well. So it's definitely fun to have that local interaction with people. So so you don't kind of feel left out because what I hear other gardeners is like, yeah, there's this other gardener who's close to me and we always are like interacting. I always go to her garden, she always comes to my garden. And it's really fun to interact. So you're definitely building like friends in the garden industry and especially on media side of things like me as a gardener and as an educator on Instagram and on YouTube. I came across so many fun gardeners that I consider friends because they are like on top. They're like, yeah, do you do this to your garden? Do you do that to your garden? So they're like, we're helping each other in our gardening journey. So definitely great mindset, and I applaud you on that because where you're going is
Thank
definitely
you.
amazing. So congrats. So wrapping up this interview side of things, where could people find you if they're interested in joining your gardening
Well,
journey?
the best place is probably Instagram. That is where I put the majority of my effort because that's when I joined Instagram. The gardening community was super helpful, and I've learned so much from them and like been inspired. So I spend the majority of my time on Instagram. I have dipped my toe into TikTok. I am over there, even though I'm not the targeted demographic by any means. That's you. So I am on TikTok with the same name, the Ever Hopeful Gardener, and I'm also dipping my toe into YouTube. Uh, but I'm like, I'm so lazy. I'm like, oh wait, if I'm filming on YouTube, I have to turn my camera around. Like, so the YouTube is very slow going. I think I just love Instagram the most because I find it to be the easiest to get information, but also interact in a meaningful level with other gardeners. Like on TikTok, I just haven't developed any meaningful relationships. Same with YouTube; it just doesn't seem as back and forth. So, but yes, I'm the Ever Hopeful Gardener on all three: YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. I also have a blog that I really neglect. I have a website, everhopefulgardener.com, but I think the last post was probably like 6 months ago. It's not good. I know. I'm not acting like a businesswoman in any sense of the word. But
Yeah, so for Instagram, I definitely see you're more active on Instagram. So I'll be leaving all her information down below in the description box so people could like find you more easily. But YouTube, I would definitely recommend giving it a go because I'm more active towards YouTube because YouTube is super fun for me because although you build an audience, you interact with people in the comment section and it's
okay.
really fun to get to know people through the comment section and you get to know other gardeners who are strictly on YouTube and it's really fun to see how you're able to like inspire other people and teach people about composting. Like I promise you, if you make a video on methods on how to make composting easier, people are gonna see it and they're gonna start interacting with you. That's what I love. And what I've seen about gardeners is they don't do it for the money wise of things or revenue from YouTube. If not, they do it to educate, inspire, encourage people to get into gardening. So definitely, I would recommend to go check her media pages out because I also started dipping my feet into TikTok because although they're like this huge conspiracy of like young kids loving TikTok, I I'm okay with TikTok, but like algorithm on TikTok has to be a bit more better than Instagram and YouTube per se because there's a huge spike of interest in gardening on TikTok side of things. Like I was
Yeah.
surprised. Like when I uploaded a video on strawberries, that thing blew up overnight because people are interested in learning more through TikTok since it's like a platform a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people use and people are just going crazy. Like I've seen gardeners with millions of followers on TikTok and their gardening pages because they love doing what they're doing, and also the audience members are interacting with them in the comment section. and they're learning a lot of things with a 10 minutes, even a minute video. So it's like a short video, but it's packed with
Okay.
information. So definitely.
I have a question for you. Okay, how do you garden your own garden, help your neighbor's garden, record all these podcasts, and post on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube? Where are you finding the time?
For me, like I have every time in the world. Like although I'm a like a high school student, I don't do anything else. Like if you don't see me in the house, I'm usually in the garden, either recording a video or helping my neighbor or doing TikToks. Because not kidding, I can literally film a TikTok, a YouTube video, and an Instagram post in the same time frame and have it released like an hour later. Because I literally am on top of everything and I have time for everything in the world. Like that's why I said I have 3 recordings today because I literally have the time of the day to do anything. Like there's this one time that I was, cause I'm a florist. I do flower arranging more than I do gardening. Like that was the first thing that got
Mm-hmm.
me into gardening. And whenever Valentine's Day or Mother's Day comes around, I'm like packed, but I always tend to find time to go into the garden and everything. So like right when the we get back from school, I come in the garden, I position myself, I film, I go inside, I edit, and I release the video. So I like have the entire time of my hands to do anything I
I'm
want.
severely impressed with you. Not severely. I'm seriously impressed with you.
Thank you. Um, so now moving off of the interview side of things, we definitely discussed a lot, and I've definitely feel inspired by you. You are an amazing gardener, and the story you gave is definitely intriguing. So now let's move on to our garden topic of the week, which is raised bed gardening. So raised bed gardening is actually a gardening technique a lot of gardeners love doing. Like I've seen it spike, and like wherever profile I visit, they usually have a raised bed or two because they love raised bed gardening. So on the raised bed gardening type of things, I know you do raised bed gardening as well. Would there be any tips or tricks or advice you would give to those gardeners who are interested in doing raised bed gardening that you can help them in succeeding in doing raised bed gardening?
Gosh, the only vegetable gardening I do is in raised beds because then I'm not dealing with any soil issues or compaction issues. Our house when it was built, they like just graded the heck out of our yard because they had to put a septic system in, and they just compacted that red clay. So growing anything in that has been difficult, which is why I have raised beds, and I have two different types. I built brick raised beds that are like 4 feet by 10 feet. I have four of those. And then I just recently got into the metal raised beds that you can configure in different
Oh.
configurations. And those are now my favorite. I'm obsessed with those. They're like the perfect height to make it easy to garden. And then I'm filling them hugelkultur style with, for people who aren't aware, that's just a method of filling the bed with lots of different materials and reducing the amount of soil that you need to purchase and put in the bed. And I've had the best success with the metal beds filled hugelkultur style with what I've been growing in there versus like my shallow 6-inch brick beds. I think a big tip would be irrigation, figuring out how you're going to irrigate the beds. I've been testing 3 different methods of irrigating the 17-inch metal beds for about a year now. And then my brick beds, I just have like the drip irrigation that so many gardeners have. But figuring out how you're going to irrigate your beds is big, especially if you don't think you can stay on top of watering.
Definitely, those are some great tips, especially the method that you don't put 100% soil in the raised bed, because I tried building raised beds. Like I have a raised bed like right in front of me that I built from a old plastic fencing a neighbor was throwing away, and so it's at a decent height, and like I'm like on a budget type of things. I just threw like. I recently harvested my cabbage, so I just threw the leaves in there. I put like avocado leaves that they dried out. I put branches and stuff like that in the base, as well as cardboard material, which like fills up half of it, and the rest I filled up with soil. But what I realized is when I went to go dig deeper, that all started decomposing, and that was like richer soil. So what I love about raised bed gardening is that you're able to manage what your vegetables are receiving nutritious wise, as well as the soil. So you're able to choose what they're
Mm-hmm.
growing in. Because for me, my soil is always humid. It's never dry. It's always sandy. Like whenever it rains, you'll walk out and you'll see the first surface of the soil to be
Mm-hmm.
sand. As well as, although when it rains a lot, my garden tends to flood, but it's well draining, so it's always constantly like that. Which my beds where I have vegetables growing in right now, they're like elevated. So like I kind of like put soil on top of my soil and just like amended it and just planted my stuff there, since I don't want to directly plant things into the ground knowing what's
Mm-hmm.
in there. So definitely raised bed gardening is something I want to kind of do more of, because I also have cloth raised beds. I don't know if you heard of them. They're from like Smart Pots.
Cloth.
Um, they sell like
Oh.
cloth fabric. They're made out of fabric, and they are a decent size to grow multiple different vegetables. Like my Brussels sprouts are growing in one. I have determinate tomatoes growing in one, as well. I have onions growing in another one, and they're super great because it allows air to go in, like air circulation. So like root bound isn't
Right.
a problem. So that's what I
Are you
absolutely
talking?
love
Are
about
you
it.
like? Are these just large grow bags?
If you thinking about it, yeah, but they're like super
Okay.
wide, so like they're considered a raised bed, and the height they're considered a raised bed, and I love growing things in them because you see that they're doing so well. Like my tomatoes are doing great, the Brussels sprouts are phenomenal, the onions are developing. So definitely raised bed gardening is something I want to do more of, since like the flooding type thing, since like Florida is almost getting into the hurricane season. Like I'm trying to like prevent my plants to get like that flooded type thing. So definitely your tips were amazing, and what I would recommend definitely.
Yep.
And definitely try to figure out the composting, like what Amanda says. Definitely go check out her Instagram, which is packed with information about composting. Because like what we said, that it's best to give the ground what it giving us. So like a cycle of like returning to the ground what it's providing for us. So that was definitely a great interview, as well as a garden topic to discuss with you about. And I want to thank you again for joining with us on this podcast episode. It was such a pleasure to have you on here. And definitely go check Amanda out. She's an amazing gardener at the Ever Hopeful Garden. I'll be leaving her media information in the description box below, so definitely go check her out. So thank you again, Amanda, for joining us on this
You're welcome,
episode.
Emmanuel. I really enjoyed talking with you.
It was a great experience. So we'll see you guys for the next garden topic of the week and the next interviewed gardener.